Hi everyone, it's Joakim, your host of the Elite Game Developers Podcast, a podcast about the entrepreneurs and investors who are building the games companies of the future. In May of 2023, I went on social media and posted that I would accept founders who wanted to do a pitch over Zoom, and I would give feedback on their pitch, and we would record this pitching session, and then I would share it later on YouTube and Spotify. So this is the second recording I did with Pavel Afanasiev, who is the co-founder and CEO of Northern Lights Studio, a company working on a space strategy political game for mobile called Nebulae. In this pitch, Pavel decided not to use a pitch deck and just go through his pitch in vocal presentation, which I think is an interesting take, and there's a lot more feedback on what he delivers through a 7-minute vocal pitch. Here's the episode. All right, Pavel, thanks for doing this pitching feedback session with me.
Thank you, Joakim. Thank you very much for offering this opportunity. And as you asked, we're going to keep it under 7 minutes.
Yes.
So
let's attempt that.
Oh, I think we'll be fine. So hi, my name is Pavel. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Northern Lights Entertainment. We're an 18 people with gender balanced studio based in France. I'm currently calling you from Station F here in Paris. And the positioning of our studio is that we transform global societal issues into massively played games, and we let players explore these issues within the games that we produce. And as a studio, we target markets of potential audiences of 100 million players or above. And if we think that a game has a potential audience reach that is below that, then it's a game that we're not going to make. We have existed, so we have been created in 2018 after doing about a year and a half of customer discovery with my co-founder Julie. And essentially the insight for our first game was something that I have observed when I was a community moderator for a very large browser game based in the Heroes of Might and Magic franchise, which I'm sure, Joakim, you've played many hours. And the insight was that players who stayed within the game for the longest time and players who spent the most money within the game had one characteristic that they shared, which was that they were one way or another implicated in the political interactions that were happening within the game. On an individual level, it was everything related to individual influence and struggle to be in the leaderboards, and of course interpersonal conflicts that arise between players. And on a collective level, it was related to clan warfare and control of the territories and control of the means of economic production. And the observation was that all of these political interactions, which were super engaging, actually happened outside of the game itself and had nothing to do with the gameplay of the game. They were happening on forums, on chat rooms. Back then, Discord didn't exist because we're between 2009 and 2014, and they were happening on Skype and on TeamSpeak mostly. And a question arose in my head back then, which was, well, if in-game politics is so engaging and monetizes so well, then why don't we have massively multiplayer games that actually focus on politics as a playable part of the user experience and the user journey within those games? And so I was significantly younger back then, so I didn't necessarily have the possibility to act on and execute against this vision. But it's a question that stayed with me. And later on in 2016, I was working on an entrepreneurship paper where essentially I was suggesting that a new kind of playable experience could be constructed around this observation and around this social player phenomenon. And so essentially, this is the first game that our studio, Northern Lights Entertainment, is building out, and the game is called Nebulae. It is a mobile-first strategy MMO that will come out, that has already come out in its initial version on the Google Play Store in January this year. And the game has essentially three core gameplay pillars. The first one is that you start out as a junior governor on a planet that you control, and on this planet you're responsible for the development of economic production, for the management of the societal well-being of the population that you govern on this planet, and for the balancing of environmental health of the planet, which can come undone if, for example, you over-industrialize your planet or overpopulate it. The second component of the game, and this is where we add the most value and we will provide the most innovation, is what we call massively multiplayer politics. So essentially, the core promise of the game is that players in our universe collectively govern various political regimes and can experiment with new forms of political governance and political experimentation in the context of a massively multiplayer game. So players collectively govern regimes, which can be democratic, monarchist, republican, federalist, theocratic, if you like, and totalitarian, and they can transition, the regimes, that is, can transition from one form of political structure to another if a sufficient player consensus is built around it. And finally, when diplomacy between these various nations, all of which are governed by players, fails, well, the conflicts, the territorial conflicts, are resolved through essentially warfare in space and customizable spaceships, first in algorithmic combat and then on real-time combat arenas. So I'm going to share a little extract from our gameplay footage, which we also use for our marketability testing, and you should be able to see it right now. So this is the planetary component of the game. Essentially, it's a very planet builder type of feeling, and here we have some of the initial political interfaces that are present in the game as well. I'm going to play it one more time just for the audience to have a better idea. Yeah, so here we are. In terms of traction to date, we launched the game in January this year after approximately a year and a half in playtest. During the playtest phase, we have reached a net promoter score of 56. We have also reached a 92% satisfaction rate with the political component of the game. And in terms of our marketability metrics, we're currently sitting at an extremely comfortable 50 euro cents cost per install, which is significantly lower than the market rate for mobile strategy games. And thanks to our partnership with Solston, which is an amazing company, and you should definitely work with it if you don't yet, we are currently looking at an audience of 183 million players, with an existing purchasing spending power on games of $15 per person per month. We're currently at the end of our second fundraising round. We're raising 1 million euro on a 5 million pre-money valuation, and we will have 150,000 euros left to allocate within the round. And we would be more than pleased to work together with experienced game investors and gaming angels as well. And that's it.
Thanks,
7 minutes on the dot.
Yes, pretty well done. There's a few things there. I think the traction is something we can spend some time on. Thinking about if it's that cheap to acquire, how have you actually utilized this opportunity, which might not be there in 6 months, 12 months, with the UA landscape is constantly fluctuating. How many users have you acquired so far?
We're currently sitting at a 2.3 thousand pre-registered users, which we're progressively converting into actual downloads on the Google Play Store, because we are still a couple of months away from the release on the App Store for iOS. And our total community, so if we take into account our social networks, Discord, Twitter, and Instagram predominantly, we're currently at 6.1 thousand people in the overall game community.
Yeah, I think one of the aspects here that I would really go into is, like, you have launched, and the traction is sort of like you're holding back a bit on the traction before you raise, which is a common opportunity to actually like make investors fear that they will miss out if the numbers when you finally launch are good. So I know the opportunity there to push to raise pre-numbers just at the cusp of getting to the numbers point. I think a lot of investors have been in this situation where they have been offered chances where they then missed out. Although it doesn't happen that often nowadays, to be honest, like where something just explodes. And another thing about like the traction is like, I think one of the things which would benefit you a lot is using some benchmark data from other products that are similar. You mentioned that the cost per acquisition is extremely cheap, but like compared to strategy, but it's still very much like you have not really like attempted to do that at scale, which could come up. And it's most likely will be the biggest argument against your 50-cent CPI is that you haven't really gone and spent $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 like consistently and seeing where the CPI goes.
Absolutely correct. And we agree with that. It's a very fair comment, and we agree with it. And we know that unavoidably, regardless of how good the early marketability metrics, whether it's CPI or even IPM, can look with small budgets, we know that the gap between the early metrics and the actual market median tends to close as you start scaling the budgets, and also as your audience starts to kind of run out in terms of like easy acquisitions or low-hanging fruits, if you like. What we think is that given that from the industry reports that we have seen, and obviously there are some conflicting numbers there, but what we're seeing is that in the strategy domain, it's currently tends to be above 3.5 euros per user, and sometimes a lot more than that even. We still think that we have quite a good margin for where we will actually continue to stay competitive in terms of user acquisition costs. So that's one. And the other part is that paid advertising luckily isn't the only accessible way for us to actually scale the user acquisition. It's an unavoidable one. It's necessary evil, if we wanted to call it this way. But we have actually been in touch with content creators as well as agencies who manage content creators, whether it is on the Twitch side of things or even the YouTube side of things. And we know that for quite a while, some of these agencies have been actually proactively looking for games that would have sufficient scale and sufficient gameplay depth that would allow them to position streamers against each other and generate this clash of communities. And basically the core gameplay premise of Nebulae, which is creating player communities around political causes, lends itself extremely well to this specific task, which is why we have confirmation from two agencies at this stage that this is exactly the type of content that both the agencies, but also the content creators that they manage, have been looking for in the mobile strategy space since approximately 2020.
So, like thinking about the traction you're looking forward to with the influencers, this is something that is still a hypothesis based on like what the agencies are saying. I think this is something that also like you're gonna benefit a lot if you go and test that like as soon as possible to highlight that this is working.
Fully agreed.
Yeah. Do you then thinking about the you mentioned 183 million players is the target audience. I'm very close to the guys at Solsten, know them quite well, and the model. This number feels a bit. You do have to elaborate more on like what is the methodology and like what other games are these people playing? Like, just bring it a bit towards like something concrete versus there's an agency that told you that there's 183 million players for this game, and like give more substance for
Of
that.
course, and we would usually tend to do that because I'm in very close touch with Joe from Stolston, and we usually, if an investor is not familiar with Stolston, we spend a few minutes explaining what the platform does and how they analyze the game design documentation, the art style, the reference games, before they actually come up with the personas that are then considered to be a high value audience for a particular game. And then obviously we have access to the platform itself. So if investors want to go even deeper and understand on a more close level, then it's also something that we can definitely communicate about.
Yeah, it necessarily doesn't need to be a another call to elaborate, but rather like, oh, this is the this is the way like we discovered this huge audience, and like what is the accuracy there is, I guess, something you want to go into. It's like, okay, we're 100% sure that like there's an untapped audience here, versus, okay, it's maybe when the game is sort of matured after 10 years of development, then like we can tap into that 183, versus what can we actually get right now with the current subset of a game where content might not be enough. Like, going into that realm is not a bad idea, I think.
So there is the high level overview, which is what Solstin is able to provide gaming companies with. And then there's what we actually test on the ground through player interviews, through marketability testing, and so on. And what we have been able to observe on the ground, so in our database of pre-registered players, is that up to 23% of players who are currently part of our database consider themselves as casual gamers. And in some of our user engagement metrics, we have been able to reach up to 30% of female players with the current value proposition of the game, which is unusually high for a mobile strategy game. And obviously, when we dive deeper into the audience metrics and into the player interviews, then the spectrum of games that emerge as games that these players currently play is actually quite broad. Obviously, on the strategy side component of things, we're going to have every single Paradox interactive game that has ever been made. But on top of that, we're also going to have the more old school fans of Civilization and Age of Empires and StarCraft, and Heroes of Might and Magic, which obviously is my background. And then, due to the presence of the spaceship combat component within the game, we're also going to have players that come from backgrounds like League of Legends and Overwatch, which are some of the more frequently cited games by our currently pre-registered players. And then on the more casual side of things, there is a nuance that is very, very interesting to us, where casual games such as, for example, The Sims come up quite frequently, unusually frequently, actually. And then there is a subset within those casual players segments where between 10 and 11% of our registered player base doesn't qualify themselves as gamers at all, and yet still are consumers of games. And we find it quite interesting because the reason why they describe they have been attracted to the value proposition of Nebulae, which is our first game, is that the presence of planetary governance mechanics and the presence of the collective political component of the game is something that actually they find extremely appealing, and not at all something that they're currently able to find on the market, which is not necessarily true. There are other games that deal with and other studios that deal with political interactions between players, and we have tremendous respect for the guys at Klung Games based in Berlin who are tackling that issue from a different angle. But it's definitely an audience segment to be reckoned with.
What is like the one thing that is going to come up most likely with the investors, which is good to tackle, is like, why has it been so hard for strategy games, especially free to play, to succeed on mobile? There have been countless attempts over the last 10 years, but can you elaborate?
As to what our perspective as to why?
Yeah, your hypothesis for this.
Several things to segment. One of them is, unfortunately, quite a lot of essentially the bad reputation that mobile games get is because of some monetization practices that are, while necessary to the survival of many games companies, are not resonating with, let's say, the vocal component of the part of the gamers. So that's one, and essentially it kind of comes down to pay to win. Another very important component, we think, and we have seen it with game adaptations from the PC branch when, for example, Stellaris came out on mobile, or when Eve Ecos was adapted to mobile devices, is that essentially, and this is a hypothesis once again, what seems to have been the initial briefing of, okay, basically take this game and transpose it to mobile devices to the best of your ability without cutting too many of the pre-existing game design features. Except you cannot always do that on mobile, because you have to simplify, which implies cutting game design features and simplifying interfaces and adapting from a horizontal screen format to a vertical one, and cutting menus and so on and so on. So there is clearly a UX issue at hand as well. And then obviously it's also a highly competitive space, because strategy games, and we know that strategy games, while having some of those sometimes predatory, sometimes necessary monetization practices, monetize extremely well. And so it means that a lot of studios want to position themselves in that segment, because they know that if you manage to capture users who actually spend, then these users are going to be loyal for a long time, and they're going to spend quite a lot of money. And so this brings a number of actors into the sphere.
Maybe a question about like the one thing that was missing when you went through your pitch is how you picked the platform of mobile versus PC and other optionalities. I think that's a key question, especially for somebody who pulls out back a bit as an investor and thinks about, okay, what are the fundamental choices that this team has done regarding their business? Like, for instance, going to mobile, where we know it's going to be tough since the core audience isn't there. So I think it's good to have some kind of answer for that as well.
Yes, regarding that, actually, initially when we started thinking about Nebulae, it was a PC game. And we have made the switch to mobile quite early on in development for two fundamental reasons. First of all, because we discovered that the core audience was there, because what came up in our customer discovery and our testing was actually that players who fall within the first segment of the audience, which is strategy gamers that we're targeting, actually they don't really care that much as to what device they want to play on. And so this was the starting point. And then what really hit the nail on the head was the fact that we're building a game that wants players to continuously be on the lookout as to what has been the latest policy that was passed, how did the latest negotiations go, how did the latest elections go, did the revolution attempt that was happening in the neighboring nation succeed or fail. And all of these things, they come quite close in terms of user experience to a habit that already exists within users, which is essentially scrolling through the timeline of your Twitter or Instagram or Facebook feed, and essentially desperately consuming news. And so this was kind of a societal trend, or if you want, a user trend that we definitely wanted to pick up on, and which lends itself extremely well to the value proposition of the game.
Yeah, I think there's just from if somebody asks these questions, like why hasn't strategy succeeded on mobile, and then going into like, why did you go to mobile? Because the users are there, but then they aren't there. Just like, I know that you're not trying to, like, you're not aiming to point out that there's a contradiction there, but it could be that it comes off as strategy games haven't been popular on mobile, but this time it's going to work because of this political angle. I think that leads me to ask about like you talking more about product market fit as well, which as a word like is kind of like you have traction and then you have traction and then you have product market fit. Where do you see yourself there on that kind of spectrum?
So we like to reason in terms of 3 stages. So we like to reason in terms of proof of concept, MVP, and then PMF, so product market fit. We're definitely past the proof of concept stage because we were able to validate the core business hypothesis of the monetization strategy of the game, which is actually customization items and quality of life items and skins, because we managed to transform a marketing budget of 450 euros because we were super poor when we were running the pre-sales campaign, into over 42,000 euros worth of sales of those customization items and quality of life items. And so we consider that as a proof of concept point, and it's also based off this traction that we were able to raise our first pre-seed round of funding in 2021.
Yeah, now, that's actually a good question. Like, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, like you now mentioned, a core component is like your previous sort of like money raised. I think that's something you left out in the pitch, and there's a few reasons why I think it's really good to bring in always, is that there's people who are already vouching for you with their capital and their help, and it's good to highlight how much you've raised and who are the backers. Like, are they sort of very useful people besides capital?
I was looking at the clock and I saw that I was mildly running out of time, but it's a fair point. I alluded to that fact by saying that this is our second fundraise that we're currently closing right now.
Yes.
But it's true that I didn't necessarily have the time to elaborate on the first round and the members of the investor community who are also now part of the second fundraise. Is it something that you would want me to elaborate on now, or?
I guess it's more about like it's not necessary. Like, okay. But like I would still like think that's something that helps you.
Yes.
In like dropping that quite early, even like who is investors and everything. Yeah, it kind of like I usually like to put the team slide if you're going through a slide deck or any kind of like structure of a pitch, where you earlier talk about the people involved compared to talking about it way later. Like, it usually helps. Of course, like if you don't really have any logos to put there, or if you're just starting off your career in gaming, maybe you're coming from the university even, like then there's an opportunity to use traction up front and then the team later. But it's a good sort of like thing to think about.
Yeah, we tend to do that when the pitch format is slightly longer. Normally, and we discussed this shortly before the call, usually our typical pitch is approximately 10 minutes, and the extra 3 compared to the 7 that we did today actually allows for all of this amazing extra stuff, because we actually do have really cool advisors and early investors, both from the deep games community, but also from the financial side of the games community and games investing, and people who do M&A in the games industry who are on board of this journey with us.
Yeah. Final question from my end is a bit more on the side of the benchmarks, but also the venture backability here. Like, is this a VC scale business? Because, like, to be honest, like I do feel that the game is great. I'm very like questioning the 183 exact million players out there. So because it just feels it's a platform that has had a hard time with strategy. So there's a lot of questions there. So I think an area where you could like push a lot more is to show, hey, this is what's going on with previous titles that in this space, in this genre, have done well with this audience, with a similar gameplay style. Like a political simulation strategy game does feel like something new, and like I'm not so sold on seeing something similar that I could immediately say that, oh yeah, this is a venture backable business. It could be a really good games business, but can it go on the track where you raise again in 2 years, like at the 4x multiple, and then again 4x? So yeah.
We definitely feel very, very convinced that it can. One of the reasons, I mean, there are many, but to keep it short and concise, I think actually one of the reference games that keeps coming up in Solston quite a lot, but also in the customer interviews, which is a mobile strategy game, is Rise of Kingdoms. Which I believe last time I checked had like 100 million downloads on the Google Play Store alone, and I'm not an iPhone user, so don't remember it off the top of my head right now. But I would argue that is a venture backable business, both in terms of revenue, but also in terms of scale. But another thing that I think is important to point out is the fact that we're starting on mobile, but then we're moving to PC. And some of the one of the technological choices that we made really early on as a studio is to develop the game on Unity, which actually allows for this cross portability into the PC space. And actually, we have had a really interesting conversation recently with some of the bigger entities, such as, for example, Scopely and Playtika, whom we have met at the Game Developers Conference and elsewhere. And it turns out that some of these traditionally mobile players are now actively hunting for studios that actually are producing contents or games rather that extend beyond the mobile platform. And since the purpose or the objective rather of venture investors is to have an exit horizon, and we know that both Scopely and Playtika are kind of have been on an acquisition spree recently. We know that there is definitely a studio repurchase potential that's there. One final short component that I will add here is that because of the positioning of the studio and because of the nature of the game, we have also been attracting commercial interest from non-gaming entities for a version of the game that would have a more B2B type of usage. We have been in talks with the French Ministry of Defense, and we have also been approached by some representatives of one of the big four consulting firms, which see the potential of a game that analyzes players' political behaviors and their capacity to federate people around causes and collective objectives that can also be used in management training, but also in crisis simulations and team building exercises on the more B2B side of things. It's a path that's like way further down the line. But we know that it's a possibility ultimately for us as a studio. And all of these three combined, we think makes us a venture backable studio.
Yeah, I think there's a few, like, well, let's put it this way, like, out of those things that you mentioned, like the best like case that makes it venture backable is, I think, the concept of what you mentioned about Rise of Kingdoms. The doing a self-published game and then rebranding to B2B purposes, it has sort of like a connotation that, okay, it's gonna be a big distraction for you to do a work for hire project, or any kind of like side project where you're not directly publishing to players. So, but the Rise of Kingdoms, I think that's very interesting, where you could double down more, especially when you're saying this 183 million players. sub-segment identified highly with the players of Rise of Kingdoms. Does your game have like 4X elements?
It is a 4X game. It's a 4X strategy game.
Yeah, I would like double down on that as well, because now it does feel a bit that like because that then is definitely successful on mobile, and there have been several big companies built on 4X titles, like focusing on that. Have you contemplated on more doubling down on the 4X angle here in the pitch?
Usually we haven't had a question about it, because when we say it's a mobile strategy game, people automatically project, and then they use the term 4X when they kind of either ask us questions and so on. So it's not necessarily a feedback that we have had before. Usually the overlap between mobile strategy and 4X is almost intuitive, at least with the investor conversations that we have had so far.
Okay, so it's yeah, I couldn't pick it from your like pitch, so like I don't know if that's worth anything. Like you could even happens. Less mentioned, like it like then like you're not leaving it to sort of like
imagination
chance that that the investor can sort of sort of like draw the dots like the line between the dots that this game is similar to those giants in the market. That's going to be really helpful. And then going more in depth into like the spending patterns, I think the way that you make revenue was quite non-existent in the pitch. So the business model side of things makes sense to cover as well. Yeah. Do you have any questions for me about the pitch specifically, where you're sort of like unsure, or you know?
I have a couple. If you still have the time.
Yes.
One of them is regarding the duration. So obviously you have been angel investing for many years now, and I know that you're getting massive amounts of inbound requests from founders who seek either your personal investment or investment from the syndicate. What is the typical duration of the pitch outside of the exercise today that you actually allow founders before you interrupt them or cut them short? Is it still the 7-minute format, or do you allow slightly less time, slightly more time?
Yeah, I think like for the purpose of this pitch training, I wanted you to condense it more, to keep it under limits. I think I'm quite worried about people who spend too much time on their pitch and material versus the discussion. So like if you have a 30-minute slot with an investor, 7 minutes of pitching and monologue is definitely the max I would go for. So and 30 minutes is quite common. So
understood.
Yeah, and then I think it's more about like, okay, then like what you can do is expand by sending the material beforehand, so that the investor can get on top of things and make some understanding of who they're going to be talking to, what's the business like and everything. So it helps you to expand kind of the time you spend in the investors sort of like vision and ears.
Yes. Thank you very much for that. And my second question is, how do you feel about pitches without slides now that we have done the exercise?
Yeah, to be honest, it does have a benefit where it's a lot easier to concentrate on what you're saying and take notes versus looking at text at the same time as somebody's talking. Although it does help to have a slide that supports what you are exactly saying. Let's put it this way: when you talked about the Solsten material, you could have had a slide where you have game like logos of games that are played by these players without text. So just being very cautious about like showing a pitch deck where you have hundreds of words and also try to talk something else that isn't said in the slide. So yeah, but yeah, still having like a deck that you send beforehand is super beneficial.
Yeah, that's usually what we do. Like usually we reach out either intro or cold email. We actually love cold emails, even though they're not necessarily the most popular form of investor
Yeah.
engagement, but they tend to work for us quite well.
Mm.
And usually we share like a short blurb as to where we are and what we're doing, what our traction to date is, and then there's like a link to the deck. And usually, actually not usually, always all the time, the investors will have had at least a short look at the deck before actually taking the call. And then it allows us to keep the pitch relatively short. Within usually within the 10-minute range for a 45-minute slot. That's because that's usually the one we go for. And then based on the slides that we know that the investor has particularly looked at, then we know the kind of questions that they will be asking. So it also allows us to prepare. Thank you very much for your time. How do you feel now that we have done the exercise? I mean, we've known each other for a while. Now, how do you feel overall about the studio and about the game?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, I definitely want to see when you're at that point where you can prove the product market fit. But I would very much encourage you to think about also if things like, you're going in a certain direction and if there's no, clear next step, what you need to do to make it work better, like consider a pivot. Like that's something that a lot of companies that I've known for a long time, they maybe are very cautious about pivoting. So I think this is something that you could also talk with the team very openly. If like this year you hit a point where it feels like, okay, mobile isn't the place. Like I think this is the place where I'm most scared about is the CPI. For Forex is notoriously like hard. I don't know if that's a reason why you didn't mention Forex, but let's leave that to another conversation.
Not
But
not
yeah,
necessarily, no. I mean,
yeah,
we know it's tough, but at the same time, it's kind of tough for everyone out there. And yet, despite the fact that it's tough for mobile 4X, it's still more expensive to acquire users for PC platforms. So for an
yeah,
identical game, I mean.
yeah. It's I guess like I'm not an expert on like acquiring users on PC, but like that's an area where if you need to explore pivots in the future, like there's probably like there could be greener grass somewhere. It's hard to say, but like yeah.
We've actually been quite transparent both internally with the team as well as the investors, whether it's the first round or the current round, as to what our possible pivot opportunities could be. And it's actually part of the investor due diligence pack that we distribute once people say, okay, I would like to explore this further. Please show me what you have. So there are 2 or 3 pivot possibilities for us. One of them being a more kind of Terra Genesis type of game focused on planetary governance, which would be a solo game. And then there is the more combat related component with collective impact of your individual actions as a starship pilots and how it then affects the overall distribution of a galaxy map, which is a different pivot direction. And definitely not a solo game. And then obviously there's the collective politics component, which can be a more interface-based game, which would then subsequently be more niche and therefore less venture backable. But it's also a pivot opportunity that we definitely have in our minds in case things go south.
Yeah. Best of luck, Pavel, to the fundraise and to the launch, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me over. It's been a pleasure and a privilege, Joakim. Thank you very much. And I think on behalf of all of the founders out there, I wanted to thank you for taking the time and also offering the platform of your reach to be able to pitch, but also to get super constructive and very useful feedback. Thank you sincerely.
Yeah, thanks. Take care, Pavel. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. So I have to start recording again because like this is something I wanted to share with Pavel. So with a previous founder, we were talking about the deck having this presentable deck. And then you have appendix slides where you can go in and have like a slide about benchmark numbers, have a slide about the Solsten details, have one slide about the CPIs, one slide about like a 4x, and one slide about product market fit. And you can go and present first the way that you presented, Pavel, now with this kind of, you're talking and the slide is just visuals, which aren't going to distract from listening. And when you have the discussion, you can, if the investor asks about, okay, yeah, the CPI isn't that going to be really hard later on when you spend like 10,000, 100,000, and then you can go to the CPI slide and you have the answers there immediately. It's not that you couldn't answer them like on the get-go there verbally, but I believe that the confidence that you show by having thought about them already beforehand, that you have already this all nailed out, that's gonna give you a lot of points, like that these people really know what they're doing with this business. So
fully agreed. Yeah, it's something that we actually have we have the initial response to the super critical question of CPI, but also many other aspects of whether it's the audience sizing and so on. We address them in the deck, and then the deep dive as to how and why and the sources, because everything that we do is sourced and we provide references even on the deck itself. Is something that we put in the due diligence platform that we then share with investors. And if they want to question us on their numbers, they can, and then we will respond with the sources where we have to, like, what's the source of this data? Where did you get this from?
Got it. Yeah, man, this is great. This time I'm gonna let you go.
Thank you for your time, Joakim.
Thanks a lot, Pavel, for coming on and to doing this pitching presentation with me. If you want to watch more of these, you can go to YouTube and you'll find the previous pitching sessions, and also they're on Spotify. And in the meantime, please also check out my newsletter at elitegamedevelopers.com, where you can subscribe and get the latest every week on what I'm posting. See you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.